In light of all the crazy changes that are happening in the market due to COVID, Brexit, the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine and Russia, does it make sense to go into contracting, especially when things are up in the air? Now, unfortunately, that's not a straightforward answer. And this has really come from different people asking me different questions based on the videos I've done on getting into contracting in the recent months. So today I'm going to talk about different factors that will help you think about whether it makes sense for you to get into contracting or not. Now, the first thing to note is that there is a huge great resignation that's been happening ever since the part of the pandemic. And this has been due to the fact that many millennials, at least, have been feeling like the places that they've been working in have not been fulfilling them. They've been burnt out. They've been quiet quitting. There's been anxiety. There's been certain levels of depression. There are all these different mental health conditions and psychological conditions that are affecting their state and well-being. And so they've wanted to jump ship. They've wanted to see if the grass is greener elsewhere. Now, for some of these individuals, they've been successful in doing that. But for many others, they've realized that jumping ship doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so it creates an issue. How does this relate to contracting? Well, for those people who have jumped ship and potentially haven't been able to be replaced in that previous employer, usually what happens is, or in some instances, these employers need to find someone quickly in order to, again, realize a project. And so this is where contractors come into play. And so with that in mind, there was a really good time, at least the mid part of the pandemic, where it was really good for contracting in certain seasons that didn't feel like it should be good. Now, again, I'm getting these sources from agents, but with this in mind, just note that with people leaving their permanent roles, there is an opportunity for contractors as well. Now, again, this won't necessarily last forever because there is a pull effect that is happening at the moment, in a sense that as budgets are being cut, and this is my next point, there is a smaller source of money that's being spent on different projects and functions. And so when it comes to this, when budgets are being cut, it's then thinking about this is going to affect a certain industry. This is going to affect a certain area of the market. But the thing to note about this is that what survives are the key functions of those different departments. Now, I'm talking mainly about government departments, but we all know that public sector organizations will affect private organizations as well in terms of bidding for work and tenders and etc., etc. But again, like I stated before, what will survive is those key functional areas that are required to ensure that that department is still up and running, or that service is up and running for the public. And so when it comes to quickly bringing those services about again, this is where contractors come into play. So contractors are really important for setting things up, being part of transformations, ensuring that there is the right level of expertise and know-how when it comes to setting this stuff up. It doesn't mean that permanent employees can't do these things, but there is a bit of red tape, or there is a delay in terms of bringing in the right people. Sometimes it could be 3 to 6 months to get a permanent member of staff to start a new role from when that role was needed. Whereas with a contractor, it could be anywhere between 2 to at most 6 weeks in order for someone to come through. And so the speed of implementation of getting these individuals in is different. The next thing to say is that there's this idea of perceived value. And what I mean by that is contractors are seen to be positioned as specialists or experts, or people who have been in X game for a long amount of time. Now, this may not necessarily be true, and this is why it's called perceived value. But because this perceived value exists, organizations will always bring in some sort of contractor or consultant, whether they're inside or outside of IR35. And you'll usually see this. Usually what happens is they'll bring in a band of contractors or a band of consultants to, again, develop the thinking and know-how behind how to set something up. And then they will bring in more independent contractors to support these different endeavors. And so there is a perceived value that exists within the marketplace. Within the UK specifically, and especially, contractors are very important because we live in a country that is service-based heavily and is IP-based heavily. Now, of course, there have been changes due to the fact that we have come out of the EU and Brexit has taken place. And so there is a decline in GDP, so to speak, because we have had to spend money to redo certain things that we've had when we were in the EU. But in redoing some of those things, this is where contractors may come into place. So there's a bit of a yin and yang effect. There is money that is being spent or saved elsewhere, but money also needs to be spent in order for these things to be upheld or delivered. And so there is a question to be had in terms of a macro understanding of the economy. But as it stands for now, it's being managed based on some of the measures that the new government will put in place, i.e. Rishi Sunak, as of the 25th of October 22. Before I continue, if contracting still feels appealing to you and you're looking to understand how to get into this space, I've developed a course called The Independent Consultant, a guide to becoming a contractor within the UK. So this is a comprehensive breakdown of how I got into the contracting space and the different things you will need to know in order for you to feel confident about transitioning. So if this is something you're interested in, then make sure to click on the link below. In addition, based on everything that I say in this video, are you still convinced that it makes sense to go into contracting now? For you at least anyway. Comment below. The other thing to note is that it may be quiet for some contractors or for people trying to get in. And so this is an opportunity to do at least 3 things. Number 1, look at your CV and cover letter and make sure that things are up to date. So ensure that it really expresses the different roles, responsibilities and achievements that you've had over the last couple of months. Maybe you want to get a professional CV writing service to help you do this. The second thing is to make sure that your admin and organization is on point. So this comes down to looking at your accounting, your finances, any emails, any letters, anything you need to correspond to. So make sure your house is in order. The third thing is finances, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail. Just make sure that all payments are being made on time and you're really clear about where you're at in terms of your financial situation. The other thing to add to this is that there is something known, to me at least anyway, known as industry favourability. And what this means is that during hard times, there are some industries that are just going to thrive. And this is thinking about things that people fundamentally need. So for example, people fundamentally need healthcare. People fundamentally need security. People fundamentally need transport in order for goods to come into the country. So these are fundamentals. Maybe you can think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to give you an idea of what different things are required. So think about those basic needs, those security needs before you get onto the relationship and all those other needs that is spoken about in the typical model. So you need to think to yourself, does my role or the thing that I'm looking to get into make sense for contracting right now? Do I have a certain expertise? I mean, for example, there are certain roles that will always be needed. So these are either niche specialist roles within healthcare as an example, or these are more generic roles like project management or digital transformation. These are things that are quite big right now, especially as we go through these shifts. So sometimes it's thinking about the macro, what the country needs as a whole, and whether you can support those. Don't scare yourself into doing this, but maybe talk to some agents who'll give you an idea of what is hot and what is not right now. The next thing to think about is your finances. Again, I've said this so many times, you have to be your own financial manager when it comes to contracting. And so this is where you need to make sure that you have enough disposable income. Whether you believe cash is queen or king, it's going to be really useful because, again, you may need this money to support you when you're looking for contracts, or you may need this money to help you pay for different trainings. What I would avoid during this time is any big purchases like cars, houses, big holidays, etc., big events. What I'd also think about is ensuring that you have a solid emergency fund, okay? I mean, they say 3 to 6 months, but I say make it as big as you need it to be, okay? Whatever makes sense to ensure that you're protected during these times, and it has to be for emergencies. If you've got any debts, do your best to clear it off. If you're currently in a contract, pay that off straight away. If you're not in contract, I would still recommend you do these things. Have a time to do some sort of financial review or audit on your life. You can use things like Money Dashboard, or export it from your bank's app and basically play around with it if you're an Excel whiz. These are all things you need to do. Think about your habits, because really your spending comes down to your habits. And do you need to do certain things? Look at your expenses and see if there's anything you can take away. Is there anything you don't need? Again, managing your money during this time will really determine whether it makes sense for you to transition into this space or not. Now, typically, anything leading up to the new financial year, which is April, and just after that is usually a good time because people are thinking about budgets, new projects, new services. Another good time is usually just after September, when people are back from the holidays and everyone's rethinking budgets and how they need to approach things. So again, October, November is potentially also a decent time as well. Between those different months, it's questionable, and it is dependent upon, again, the industry, the market, the end client, the niche, all these different factors. And so is that going to be typical during this time? Not necessarily, no, but it's something to bear in mind. It's something to bear in mind that if you are going to move into these spaces, think about the time of the month in terms of what makes sense. Now, this isn't a hard rule. This shouldn't scare you totally, but you need to think about, again, the industry. And this is why speaking to different agents and different contractors is important, to get a feel, get a flavor of what makes sense for you right now. So I've listed all these different possible factors. Are there any other factors that you can think of? So again, if this is something that you're thinking of doing and you feel like now's the time, then make sure to click the link below to check out The Independent Consultant, a guide to becoming a contractor within the UK. If you want to hear more videos around emotional intelligence, career development, and also life management, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.